Visit Scotland caught up with Dana Gabaldon about her inspiration and research. She gave her thoughts on the new television series and described her very first trip to Scotland, the land that inspired Outlander.
Oh, I'd never been to Scotland when I wrote Outlander. I did that from library research. I wrote the book for practice, not intending to show it to anyone, let alone try to get it published, but things happened, and here we all are. Because up to this point I had written a lot of everything, anything anyone would pay me for, anything that you have to write in the process of getting a PhD, being an academic, and even a few comic books for Walt Disney. So no one had ever shown me how to write, doctoral theses or software reviews or comic books. I had just looked at a few, wrote one, and if it didn't look quite right, I poked it till it did. So the next question was, what sort of book shall I write for practice? Wasn't going to show it to anyone, didn't matter. So I thought it was the easiest kind of book I could write, and thought perhaps, historical fiction. I was a research professor. I knew my way around a library. Said it seems easier to look things up than to make them up, and if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record. So I said, fine, historical novel. So I was casting around for a time and place to set this novel, and I happened to see a really old Doctor Who rerun on public television. Anyway, the Doctor had picked up a young Scotsman from 1745, and this was a young man, 18, 19, who appeared in his kilt. And I said, well, that's kind of fetching. And I found myself still thinking about this the next day in church. And I said to myself, well, it doesn't really matter where you set this. The important thing is pick a point, get started. I said, fine, Scotland, 18th century. So that's where I began, knowing nothing at the time about Scotland or the 18th century, having no plot, no outline, and no characters, nothing but the rather vague images conjured up by the notion of a man in a kilt. They fortunately gave me a 3-book contract when they bought Outlander, and I said to my husband, well, I really must go and see the place. So we went to London, rented a car, drove up to the Highlands, and spent several weeks roaming around looking at things. I have, over the years, seen various attempts to make my work into a 2-hour movie, and I can tell you on the basis of what I have seen that it's flat impossible to do that. And so it was a great relief to me when we got the opportunity to do a 16-episode television series. I was thinking, well, at least there'll be room. I knew Ron Moore had a great reputation as a storyteller and a filmmaker. And I told him, I said, this is the first script based on my work that I've seen that did not make me either turn white or burst into flame. The photography is just amazing. I mean, not that Scotland by itself is not amazing, but the way that they have photographed it. Ron said from the beginning that from when he realized that we could film in Scotland, which is what he and I both wanted, that he said that Scotland was be as much a character in the show as any of the actual cast members, and it certainly is. Now, it's just spectacular. The books have been out for about 23 years now, and I've heard from an awful lot of people who came to Scotland because they'd read the book. Not a few of them then married Scots and stayed, both male and female. I remember standing on the border at the Carter's Bar, with that big monolith that says England on one side, Scotland on the other, and looking out over Scotland and thinking, yeah, I recognize this place. It's just as I'd been imagining it.